Welcome to today's reading from Retelling Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Part 1, Vidur's Pilgrimage. We are going to read from Chapter 11 today, Calculation of Time from the Atom. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vidur inquires further about the nature of time, and Maitreya describes how time is measured in relation to atoms. Maitreya also explains the difference between human years and that of the Pitris, the lesser gods, the Manus, the principal gods, and that of Brahma and the inhabitants of the highest planets. In so doing, he explains the duration of different ages, Satya, Treta, Dwapar, and Kali Yugas. He describes how religious principles deteriorate in each age, and thus the method of self-realization becomes progressively simpler and more potent. Finally, Maitreya explains that although time is immeasurably powerful, it cannot control Krishna or his pure devotees. As the two friends were speaking, the sun had risen. In a cloudless blue sky, it promised to be a hot day. By virtue of this long yoga practice, Maitreya was undisturbed by extreme weather. But out of consideration for Vidur, he suggested they move to a shaded spot further upriver. The two men walked in silence, Vidur carrying his staff and Maitreya a water pot. After a short while, they reached a sparkling rivulet shaded by green foliage. The stream gurgled pleasantly as it flowed down from hills, collecting in rock pools before falling as small waterfalls and continuing towards the Ganges. Maitreya helped Vidur climb up to one of the larger pools surrounded by the overarching boughs of trees laden with fruits. Pink water lilies floated on the crystal clear pond, and multicolored fish darted between them. Green and blue parrots flew squawking in and out of the red blossom trees. Water sprayed pleasantly, keeping the area cool. The two men slaked their thirst and then seated themselves comfortably on the soft bluish grass growing near the pond. After admiring their celestial surroundings, Vidur said, "O learned Maitreya, please continue describing the nature of time." Verse 1, Maitreya said, "To properly comprehend time, you require a basic understanding of the atoms which comprise the universe, known as Parmanu. Indivisible and eternal, they survive even the dissolution of the planets and are the foundation of all material form." "I have heard students of sage Kannada's Vaisheshika school speak about these atoms," replied Vidur. "They interpret Kannada's teaching variously. Some say there is only one type of atom, others say there are 4 earth, water, fire, and air atoms." Maitreya smiled and shook his head. "People often misunderstand atoms. Actually, they are invisible." Verse 2, he swept his arm around in a large arc to indicate their surroundings. "Atoms are the ultimate state of everything. Initially, they constitute the unlimited oneness, technically known as Param Mahan. Later, they combine to form countless material varieties." "Why is it important to know about atoms in order to describe time?" asked Vidur. Verse 3, time is the Almighty Vishnu's invisible potency by which he pervades and delimits the cosmos. It is measured in relation to combinations of atoms from the smallest division to the largest. Verse 4, Vidur appeared confused and Maitreya explained, "Time is calculated by the sun. The time expended for the sun to go the distance from one atom or Parmanu is thus called Parmanu of time, and the time expended from one dissolution to the next is called Param Mahan or supreme time." Param Mahan. "Do you understand?" "I think so," replied Vidur. You are saying that time and space are correlative terms, since time is measured by how long it takes for the sun to pass over a certain space of atoms. The time it takes for the sun to pass over a single atom is the basic unit of atomic time. The greatest span of time is measured in terms of how long it takes for the sun to pass over all the planetary systems from the creation until their annihilation. Yes, you understood perfectly, Maitreya said, his face lighting up with delight at his students' comprehension. I have a question, said Vidur. Since the atom is invisible, how can it be used to measure invisible time? Verse 5. Ah, very good. You see, atoms unite. When two come together, they become a double atom, technically known as anu, or anu, like we say in Sanskrit or Hindi. When three anus combine, they form a hexatom called a trisharayanu. These are invisible. Really, exclaimed Vidur. It requires the right conditions. For example, in a dark room with the sun shining into it, perhaps through a lattice window, if you carefully observe the sunbeams, you will see tiny particles in the air currents. These are hexatoms, or the Trisharenu, because that is three anus or atoms combined. Maitreya peered up at the branches of the overhanging trees beyond which the sun shone brilliantly. Since it's quite shady here, if you look carefully up at the light shining through those branches, you may just see them. Vidur screwed his eyes and looked up at the sunshine glaring through the tree canopy. After several moments, he noticed tiny translucent dots floating in the air. Were the hexatoms or just dust particles? It was hard to say. Verses 6 to 9, Vidur listened as Maitreya explained how by combining atoms in increasing numbers, different measurements of time could be calculated. When he reached the unit known as danda, equal to 30 minutes, he described a method by which this can be calculated by placing a pierce pot on water until it overflowed. The sage added, another way of calculating a danda is backwards from a prahar. What is prahar? Verses 10 to 12, these are 4 prahars known as yamas in the day and 4 in the night of a human beings. Hence 1 is equal to 3 hours. There are 6 dandas in a prahar. 15 earthly days comprise the moon's waxing phase known as the Shukla Paksh, and the same again the waning phase known as the Krishna Paksh. These two Paksh together make a month. So Paksh is a fortnight. And Prahar is 3 hours. 1 human month equates to 1 day and 1 night on the Pitri planet where righteous forefathers reside. 2 human months are a season, and it takes 6 such months for the sun to travel from south to the north. 2 such solar movements are of course a human year, which is a day and night on the planets of the gods. Humans generally live up to 100 years. That would make one of the gods' years equal to 360 human years, Vidur said. Maitreya nodded. All movement from the orbits of the sun, the other celestial bodies, and even that of an atom takes place under the direction of the Supreme Lord in his form as eternal time. Verse 14, you may have heard of different terms used in astrology, physics and mathematics such as Samvatsara, Parivatsara, Anuvatsara, Idavatsara and Vatsara. These are different types of years measured in terms of the length of time of the respective orbits of the sun, moon, stars and other luminaries through the zodiac. This is specialized knowledge, and unless you are interested in these sciences, it is not important to explain in detail. The key point to remember is that above all branches of knowledge is the supreme control of the Lord in his powerful form of time. Vidur glanced up curiously at the sun through the branches of the trees. Why do we use the sun's orbit to calculate time and not that of the moon or other celestial bodies? Verse 15. The sun enlivens all living beings, including the other planets, with his unlimited heat and light. Without the sun, the planets could not maintain their orbits. Not only that, but the sun diminishes the duration of life of all living beings and thereby curtails their attachment to material enjoyment. The appropriate time for sacrifices to the gods are also calculated according to the sun. Gods, as we know, is referring to the demigods, the Devi Devtas, whose movements thus open up the path of elevation to the heavenly planets. Therefore, Vidur, we offer special respects to him. Verse 16, Vidur thanked Maitreya and said, "Please tell me more about the duration of life on different planets. I understand that a human month equates to 1 day and 1 night on the Prithvi planet where pious ancestors dwell. Also that a human year similarly equals a day and night on the planets of the administrative gods. These planets are destroyed at the end of each of Brahma's days. With what though is the duration of life of sages like Sanak and Brigu who inhabit the highest planets, which survive these periodic dissolutions?" Maitreya laughed. "I inhabit the earth like you. What do I know of the highest planets in the universe?" Verse 17, Vidur folded his palms. "O spiritually powerful one, you have already explained to me the movements of eternal time, Krishna's powerful form by which he controls the universe. Since you are a self-realized devotee of the Lord, residing within the heart by his grace, you can understand everything about his creation." Maitreya smiled. Vidur had such a staunch faith. Closing his eyes, he took a few moments to think before replying. Verse 18, "The lifespan of the residents of the highest planets is equal to that of Brahma. To calculate time in these spheres, I will need to speak in terms of the 4 yugas, the Satya, Treta, Dwapar and Kali." A full cycle of the 4 yugas, which includes transitional periods between them, is equal to 12,000 years of the gods. "Kindly explain how you came to that calculation," asked Vidur. Verses 19 and 20. "In terms of godly years, Satyayuga is 4,800, Treta Yuga is 3,600, Dwapar Yuga is 2,400. This is with respect to the godly years, not our human years. And Kali Yuga is 1,200. The transitional periods before and after each millennium, the Yaya Sandhyas, which last for a few hundred years, are included in this calculation. During this time, one may perform any of the religious duties normally prescribed for the specific yuga. Sorry, I said Yaya Sandhya, it was Yuga Sandhya. So the transitional periods before and after each millennium, the Yuga Sandhyas, which last for a few hundred years, are included in this calculation. During these times, one may perform any of the religious duties normally prescribed for a specific yuga, namely meditation, sacrifice, deity worship, and chanting. Vidur was curious as to why the religious duties in each yuga changed. Verse 21, Maitreya explained that the religious duties needed to become progressively simpler and more powerful to be effective. As people fully maintain their religion proportionately increases. Vidur became grave. Even in his own lifetime, he had seen how people had become more degraded. Verses 22 to 24. Now that I have described the lengths of the 4 yugas, let us return to a question about time on the highest planets where Brahma and the great sages reside. In those worlds, one day equals 1000 cycles of the 4 yugas. A similar period comprises their night, during which time they sleep, including Brahma, the universal creator. During each of Brahma's days, when a new creation occurs, 14 Manus come and go. Their lifespans, known as Manvantaras, thus last a little over 71 cycles of the 4 yugas. Do any other living beings live as long as the Manus? Verses 25 and 26. Yes, along with Manu appears the Saptarishis, or the 7 sages, as well as Indra and other principal gods, and also the Gandharvas. After this, other descendants of Manu, such as Prajapatis and other gods, gradually take birth. In this way, Brahma's daily work involves creating the planets below Maharlok, in which living beings take birth, in lower species, and in the human race and in the godly races according to their individual karmic reactions. Verse 27. Vidu remembered hearing how the Manus were Vishnu's incarnations. He asked Maitreya if this were so, and the sage replied, indeed, the Manus are his empowered incarnations. In each Manvantara, the Lord also invests other living beings with his own spiritual potency. Thus they are able to protect the universe. This is how it says here. What happens when Brahma's day ends? Verses 28 and 29. Maitreya replied, as eternal time, the Lord then accepts a small part of the material modes in the form of ignorance to become Rudra, who plunges the universe into darkness of night. At that time, the innumerable living beings merge into the dissolution and everything becomes silent. During Brahma's night, the 3 worlds up to and including Swarga are unmanifest. I'll repeat. During Brahma's night, 3 worlds up to and including Swarga. So starting all the lok from the Patals up to the Swarg lok are unmanifest. So even the Swarg gets, this Swarg or the heavens, they also get unmanifested or destroyed. And the brilliance of the sun and moon are not visible. So above the Swarg, the other celestial spiritual planets, only the spiritual planets survive during the Brahma's night. The rest of all gets unmanifest or gets annihilated. Are the sun and moon destroyed at that time? Asked Vidur. Only the planets before Maharlok are annihilated in a great fire, replied Maitreya. The sun and moon are not affected. They remain in a part of the universe which is not affected. Where does the fire come from? Asked Vidur. Verse 30. From the mouth of Lord Sankarshan, who lies at the bottom of the universe. Also, we refer to it as Anantashesh, and we know it manifests also as Balramji and Lakshmanji in different yugas. Verse 30. We are talking from the mouth of Lord Sankarshan, who lies at the bottom of the universe. So the fire comes from there. What happens on the high planets of the sages? Although the fire does not reach Maharlok, the sages there, headed by Bhrigu, feel scorched by the heat rising from below. They thus travel to Janalok. Please describe what happens in the lower planets at the time of devastation, said Vidur, verses 31 and 32 of chapter 11 of Canto 3. The fire rages for 36,000 human years. Then for a similar time there are torrential rains accompanied by hurricane winds. The seas and oceans become ferocious and overflow very quickly. The 3 worlds are inundated with water. At that time, Lord Sankarshan, who is lying on Ananta, closes his eyes and enters a mystic sleep whilst the residents of Janaloka offer him prayers. Verse 33, Maitreya explained that creation and dissolution occur on each day of Brahma's life until his lifespan of 100 years come to an end. Verse 34, Vidur asked how much of Brahma's life had passed, and Maitreya replied that his life was divided into two halves known as parardhas. The first half had already passed and the second half had just commenced. And we are, as this is all this is being spoken, this is still in the Dwapar Yuga. The Kali Yuga hasn't arrived, as Maitreya Rishi speaks to Vidur. Verses 35 and 36, the first day of Brahma's life was known as the Brahma Kalpa. It was also known as the Shweta Varaha Kalpa because a white incarnation of Lord Varaha appeared during that day. The Vedas also appeared at that time. On the second day of Brahma's life, a lotus sprouted from the navel of Sankarshan as he lay in the Garbhodak ocean. For that reason, it is known as Padmakalpa. I'll repeat, on the second day of Brahma's life, a lotus sprouted from the navel of Sankarshan as he lay in the Garbhodak ocean. For that reason, it is known as Padmakalpa or the lotus millennium. There is some controversy on this point, as some sages say that the last day of the first half of Brahma's life is the Padmakalpa. Verse 37, the first day of the second half of Brahma's life is also known as Varahakalpa because Lord appeared again as his hog incarnation. Although his bodily hue was red, not white, some sages also refer to this as the Padmakalpa, as again Brahma appeared on lotus coming from the Lord's navel. It is hardly surprising that there is controversy, replied Vidur. I am astonished that anyone can understand anything of such vast scales of time. Even one day of Brahma is difficult to understand, what to speak of his entire life. Verse 38, Maitreya laughed. Now consider the greatness of Mahavishnu, who is uncharging, unlimited, and the cause of all material causes. Brahma's entire life is less than a second for him. So for Mahavishnu, the life of Brahma is less than a second. Time exists in the spiritual world, Vidur exclaimed. Certainly. Does it control the residents there also? Verse 39, no. Eternal time controls the cosmos in small and large divisions, from the atom up to Brahma's planet Satyalok. However, it can only control those who identify with the material body. Although it exists in the spiritual world, it has no power over the Lord or his devotees who reside there. Indeed, Krishna controls time. Maitreya made an expansive gesture with his outstretched arms. Now the last verses of this chapter, verses 40 to 42. Just try to understand Krishna's greatness, Vidur. This material universe has a diameter of 4 billion miles. It is a combination of 8 material elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These further transform into 16 phenomena, the 10 senses, the mind, and the 5 sense objects. The universe is covered by 7 layers of elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, and so on. The first layer, earth, is 10 times wider than the diameter of the universe itself. Each subsequent layer is 10 times wider than the preceding one. I repeat, the first layer, earth, is 10 times wider than the diameter of the universe itself. Each subsequent layer is 10 times wider than the preceding one. The whole universe with all its coverings is thus countless trillions of miles across, and this is the smallest of them all. Yet this universe and all the innumerable others are like a cluster of atoms in comparison to Mahavishnu's body. from whose pores they emanate. Can you appreciate the greatness of Mahavishnu, who is the indestructible Brahman, the cause of all causes? Yet he is merely one plenary part of Krishna, who eternally resides in the spiritual world and whom Brahma glorifies as the original personality of Godhead. Hearing Maitreya expound Krishna's glories, Vidur's heart was suffused with joy, tears of happiness welled in his eyes, and the hairs on his body stood up. And this ends the chapter 9 of Canto 3. Calculation of time from the atom, and in the morning during the darshan arti after the dressing of the deities, we all sing part of Brahmaji's prayer from Brahma Samhita, Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Thank you for joining. We will continue with I think it's almost the last chapter. We have come to the last chapter of this part of third canto. This is the part 1 of the third canto, which will be the 12th. We will be starting the 12th chapter, which is creation of the Kumars and the others. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna. Wish you all a nice day ahead. Please chant and stay happy.